All right. Me and Mike Flynn are joining you by Zoom. Mike, I really want to touch your face. I miss you.
I know it's been a while. Probably a safe amount of time for the
Yeah,
two of us if we were the only two people
right.
that have to worry about each other. Uh,
So we're going to try to do these as often as possible, try to get some value to our client bases. As most of you know, Mike and I are partners in two businesses, a law firm and a real estate sales team. So obviously there are a lot of kind of converging interests right now, things that relate to both businesses. So we thought we'd hop on and talk about the most obvious one, which is closing deals. Because both of us, both on the law firm side and the sales team, we have closing schedules scheduled or in the process of closing. We're running into some hurdles, as are every real estate attorney, every real estate broker, real estate clients running into various similar things.
Probably actually every industry,
Yeah, sure.
but this one hits close to home, obviously, because we do a
Well,
lot
this
of.
one in particular in New York, because of how outdated the industry is in terms of everything has to be in person, a lot of paper, is the exact kind of wrong situation for a
Yeah,
pandemic where paper becomes virtually useless or difficult to get around and everything has to be done remotely. So other
right.
states are probably better equipped to deal with this. States that already are doing virtual closings, it's probably going to have a very limited impact, but here the impact
Yeah,
is far more substantial.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that is the biggest issue. Is we're mostly focusing this episode or whatever you want to call it on deals that are at the finish line, right? They were ready to be scheduled
Yep.
for closings this week, or maybe they're supposed to happen at the end of last week. And now, these aren't all dead on the table. It's just that now all the attorneys that do have to schedule these have to get a little bit creative, and this, there'll be these will all be interspersed with kids talking in the background, and hopefully not wives yelling. But lost my train of thought. Yeah, basically that's the biggest challenge is that now, as of Friday afternoon, obviously Cuomo has ordered non-essential businesses to close,
Right.
and it's pretty clear that includes real estate professionals in the non-essential category. Lawyers, it's we can all work remotely. The question is, what do you do when traditionally people all sit in a room and there's not just a social gathering, but there's a need to actually have an office, either an attorney's office or a bank office, to set out all these documents.
Yep.
So, one of the most obvious solutions, which they do all the time in other states, is closing by mail, essentially. And even just calling it that in New York State shows you how antiquated it is, right? Closing by mail rather than just an e-closing. Uh, Kind of a crazy thought. It looks like they now are allowing notarization by teleconference,
Right.
by video conference, I should say. So, and we're still reading up on these things. It's one of these. As we go, we get more information and incorporate it. But my understanding now is that if you can get everybody together with documents, I think we're talking not about e-signature documents. We're talking about paper documents that are FedExed to a party. They can sign them, and if you were a notary on the other end of this, holding up my driver's license, if you didn't already know me, we still have to uphold all the standards, for notaries. So they have to either know the person
Yeah.
or see photo ID, but it can now get done through a computer screen. And my understanding is you can then PDF or fax those signed documents to the notary. They can notarize them and PDF them back. And then there's a 30-day window after that where they would do the originals. And what happens if it doesn't get done in those 30 days? Do you go back and unwind the deal? I mean, I don't think so, but this is pretty unprecedented,
Right.
and we have to rely on the notaries and the experts to make sure that these things get done.
I think most banks on the mortgage side are taking undertakings from attorneys or title companies to
Yeah,
ensure that they're going to get the original
yeah,
copy.
that would make a lot of sense. So as long as there's liability for following the new rules, that helps offset the risk in just getting it done. Because once money is exchanged and deeds, or if it's a co-op, stock certificates are exchanged, that's it. You really can't effectively go back and unwind things.
Right.
But obviously we want to limit the cases where there could be lawsuits after the fact that there wasn't proper, authority or having to do things over.
You won't be able to sue for a while either. So
You won't be able to sue for a while. Yeah, and that brings us actually to another issue that we're wrestling with, which is that a lot of the county clerk's offices are closed, which a few people have asked if that's going to be a problem. You're gonna have a kid invasion on your end.
yeah, I was worried for a second. I heard footsteps, but we're good.
It doesn't even affect me anymore. I almost didn't even notice that.
We were talking about, we had another Zoom conference about a half hour ago, and we were talking about everybody's still trying to figure out juggling that piece, right? Figuring out how to incorporate obvious kid intrusions into their virtual meetings, virtual Zoom sessions, virtual closings when we get there.
Yeah.
Kids will be at the closing table for the first time ever from an
you have one set of documents and the kid scribbles on them. I mean, what happens then? We could have some novel issues here. But getting back to the title company issue, title companies seem to be working through this, even though there are very limited hours with a lot of the county clerks that they rely on to pull documents. So it's less of an issue of, can I get a deed recorded? It's more of an issue of when you do a continuation, as they call it, or an update on the title search, just to make sure that between the time that the title search was done and the time of closing, there are no intervening liens. Nothing got filed that they weren't aware of. They seem to be making some exceptions that I haven't seen in the past, where they can do a pretty quick search. And there might be some title litigation to come out of this also, because if anytime little shortcuts, are taken, it always opens up, a possibility for lawsuits. But it's really important that this is kind of an extension of the banking system, right? So we can't have a tremendous amount of value that's being transferred in the form of real estate, which for many people, this is going to be the best store of value in a time like this, particularly in a place like New York, or even the surrounding suburbs, where you don't see a lot of volatility in prices. They don't always go up, obviously, but we've seen in crashes in the past, 2008, 2009 comes to mind. Yes, it went down along with everything else, but you don't see tremendous drops. You're not going to have a roller coaster ride like you do in the stock market or the bond market. So I think it is really important to keep it going, because really there's going to be a gap as it is. Realtors are, like we said at the beginning of this call, they're not considered to be essential. So we don't have in-person showings of houses or open houses. So it's going to be hard to get a new deal into contract if that person didn't already see the house prior to 8 p.m. last night, March 22nd. So as it is, there's going to be a little bit of a gap in the pipeline depending on how long this persists. So it's important, I think, to make sure that we clear out what's there. I'm hearing that Fannie and Freddie are able to, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who are very big backstoppers of a lot of the mortgage loans. It's probably the easiest way to put it in lay terms. They're making some exceptions for like last minute verification of employment, which is protocol for bankers, mortgage bankers, to make sure that, yes, that person is still employed. How do you get a written verification from an employer if the employer is non essential and there is no staff, and who knows where you're sending that verification to? So I haven't seen exactly what that means, that they're streamlining or they're being more lenient with that verification of employment. But everybody recognizes that this is not business as usual. And I don't expect that questionable deals are going to get done, particularly when you do still have attorneys for buyers and sellers in New York that are shepherding the closing process. But there will be some questions that we don't have answers to. Walkthroughs are another one, and this is something that I know brokers are struggling with. Traditionally, before closing, a broker would come and walk the buyer through the property and raise any issues. Is it in the condition required for closing? Um, that's, is that part of an essential activity? We definitely don't have any kind of clear judgment on that. I would say probably err on the side of not doing those if you're the broker.
Yeah.
Um,
There is the phrase in the order that says in office work or in office
yeah,
personnel.
yeah,
Technically is somebody's home an office space. I guess it can cut either way.
yeah. I mean, it's also it's a gathering. It's not a social gathering. It's a
Right,
business gathering, and of course, you can practice social distancing on something like that. If you really wanted to play it super safe, I mean, look, if a homeowner wants to authorize another person to come in, the owner can, I guess, either step out of the property and authorize the buyer, you're allowed to come into my property, which hopefully will be yours in a few hours at closing, but walk
right.
through. Um, the owner could also maybe have their realtor or broker, on FaceTime and walk through with them.
Or this with multiple parties on the phone at the same time.
Yeah, just talking through the issues. I mean, a broker doesn't have to physically be there for a walkthrough. If an owner who has authority over their property and who's allowed on it wants to walk through, and if they want to have the broker on the phone or on FaceTime to troubleshoot any issues, um, that's probably one of the lesser concerns.
Yeah.
Just because this is mostly lawyers don't go to the walkthroughs. That's not something that happens. That is a function of the broker,
And look,
and then they'll kind of report to the lawyer if there are any issues.
there are always all kinds of creative solutions to things. So if this is all about the parties collaborating together and working together to close,
Right.
and if, for instance, at the beginning of the process there was something that the buyer really wanted to revisit a walkthrough that they had kind of earmarked to take a look at, and there's real concern about it, maybe video won't be enough, they have to see it with their own hands, you can put money in escrow, with the understanding that you want to make sure that that is going to be resolved, after you take possession. So you could have some kind of agreement, that some kind of escrow agreement that just speaks exactly to the issues that you're concerned about, or, a more generalized one that you're not waiving the walkthrough, but because of COVID, you've been unable to do it. So you're putting a certain amount of money in escrow, and you'll inspect once you're able to actually take physical possession of
Right.
the home.
Yeah, that's another important issue also because it is. I don't know that I would say it's routine. It's pretty routine. It just doesn't happen on every deal, where you can close and then the seller can stay in possession for a certain number of days,
Yeah.
and there's always a certain amount held back in escrow. But um, moving is obviously more of a challenge now
Right.
in this environment.
I think the two biggest issues, and we kind of broke this talk up into these two issues, is just the logistics of actually doing the closing, and then the logistics of moving and the safety component. So, if you have a buyer and a seller who are totally okay with moving in and moving out of their respective homes, and going to FedEx to send out documents, and going to the bank to get bank checks and sending out those checks, you're probably going to be able to close relatively easy.
Right.
Uh, we're not saying that anybody should behave like that. Everybody has their own individual situations, and the health risk is obviously super real, and all opinions are valid with respect to whether or not you should ever leave your home whatsoever. But some people are willing to do that, and in those cases, closings are going to be a lot easier to accomplish when you have one of the two parties who are less inclined to do that, or they don't want to move at all. They want to wait and see how things shake out before they let a mover touch their stuff, or before they walk into somebody else's home where they don't know whether or not that person was uh, exposed or infected in some way. Um, then it's going to be a lot more difficult from just a logistical perspective to actually close, because one side might not want to take possession. And that's where the post possession solution comes into play, and you might have to get creative with the terms, because it might not be as simple as one side pays for everything, while the other side, while that side keeps possession. There might have to be more of a balance, because it might be a concession to the buyer or the seller depending on the facts.
Right.
But that's one solution that internally we've been talking about for some of our deals to get them across the finish line in a safe way.
Right. And even things like, if you haven't done a real estate transaction in New York recently, you may not even be aware of this, but most closing dates in a contract are on or about a certain date. So if, let's say, March 23rd was the on or about closing date, well, it's fairly certain that the parties have leeway to adjourn that for up to 30 days. If, let's say, February 23rd were your on or about date, and you're now today, approximately 30 days out, it's not a statute. There's nothing written. I was going to say in stone, but there's no law that's written that says you have a 30-day leeway from your on or about date. But that's the generally accepted rule.
Yeah.
And you can one side can send what we call a time of the essence letter beyond that point, and it's kind of just industry standard that that's going to be taken very seriously, so that if you brought the other party to court, you can get your time of the essence closing enforced by a judge. The judges are not in the courthouses right now.
Right.
And frankly, even if they were, I think that 30-day convention is going to get stretched here. I mean, can you think of we did one on force majeure and acts of God and things outside of the party's control. I mean, it would be hard to think of an example that would be, an easier exception to that 30-day, not even really rule, but just convention. Then we can't close, this week or this month,
right?
Because COVID is out there, and it's a real health and safety concern, in addition to a logistical problem.
I think sellers or buyers who really want to close, the more aggressive ones will probably use that as leverage. Maybe not yet, but in the weeks to come, as some of these closings get adjourned and pushed back, and it might work. If it actually got to a courtroom and a judge, I don't think most judges would look very favorably at using that as leverage right now.
Right.
Even though movers are considered essential, even though the convention of e-closing will become more apparent, if somebody says, I'm not leaving my house, I had cancer, and I don't want to have even the risk of getting something, what judge is going to say, okay, you have to perform, you have to risk that?
Right. Especially when, you can certainly make the argument, that you're not even just being a good citizen. You're following the strictest reading of the governor's order.
Yeah.
If you don't congregate with people. I think a lot of this is how badly do both parties want to close, and it can run the gamut. You'll have people who, might look to use this as an excuse, and I think that's gonna get fleshed out relatively quickly, just because people will kind of sense, whether or not they're trying to exploit it.
Right.
But I think most people, they want to close, but they want to do it safely.
Yep.
One thing that I don't think we have, and I don't know if we want to end with this or if you think of anything else, I don't think we're going to have some of the problems we saw with the financial crisis, where you may have your funding line up with a bank that doesn't exist or is getting bought up or needs a bailout.
Right.
From talking to some lawyers and bankers today, I understand on Friday, there were some banks that they were starting to have some liquidity concerns, where it was postponed because it wasn't clear they were going to have funds. I mean, in a lot of cases, you can line up another funder. You can have especially if a mortgage broker, you might be able to line somebody up, but that could cause a pretty serious delay if you have to restart underwriting with a different bank that's going to be underwriting the loan. But it seems like the Fed, especially this morning, seems to be coming out swinging, and I think they actually said there'll be unlimited quantitative easing if necessary. That's not going to go directly toward mortgage funders, but they seem to be willing to provide whatever liquidity the banking system needs. And despite the stock market being all over the place, it seems like we're not seeing this. I remember in the beginning days of the financial crisis, when like the money market funds were seizing up, and that's when people that don't normally panic started to panic.
Yeah.
Um, this is a biological interference. You can make an argument that we were already in a downturn, but you don't know if you're in a recession until it's after it's over, actually. So I think for now, it's an interruption. It's an intentional interruption of the economic cycle, and when it's safe to do so, the biggest concern is, does this hurt employment to the point where people that were in contract and wanted to close no longer can. But short term, people who want to close, we can find a way. We can find creative ways.
I think what you're talking about is a really good incentive for people who do want to make sure that their deal closes, because we don't really know. For now, the banks have the money to fund deals.
Right.
We expect that to be the case for the foreseeable future. We have no idea what's going to happen, how long it's going to be like this for, how many, a lot of experts say we might get through this kind of first wave and there might be a lull, and then it'll come back in the fall or the winter again. And we might have to go through something very similar all over again. So, if you're incentivized, or if both parties are incentivized to close, I think the lawyers, the title companies, the banks are going to set up mechanisms to make it happen. So it comes down to you as buyer, you as seller, getting on the phone with your professionals, collaborating, figuring out ways that you can do this in a way that makes you feel safe, and get it done, sooner rather than later, because you really don't necessarily know how things are going to shake out down the road. Things can get a lot better, and maybe it'll be easier 4 months from now to close a deal, or maybe it'll be far more difficult or impossible. We just have no way to know. So just kind of, I think, a final thought on that piece.
Yeah, agreed.
So look, I mean, I think it's going to be a running dialogue. Certainly whatever legislation comes out, if they can ever agree on anything in Congress, is going to have an impact on this as well, because they're going to speak to mortgages and whether, whether forbearances are going to be granted, interest penalty forbearance. There's been some talk on the really left-wing side of the Democratic Party about ending rent or canceling rent in the interim, making rent illegal. All of these things are going to factor in and have an impact on the process. So we'll continue to have these conversations and talk about the emerging issues as
I mean,
things progress.
These are all novel issues. I think you could go pretty far back. I don't want to say they've never happened before, but I think I can't think of an example in American history quite like this. So,
all right,
we shall see. So until next time, then.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.